Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Gosden, and I teach music theory at the University of North Florida. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about time signatures. Now, this might seem like a fairly mundane topic for me to be talking about, and in certain respects, it is. And that's because time signatures are so fundamental to everything that we do as musicians. Most music is written in some type of meter, and time signatures are how we represent that on the musical page. Now, what I want to emphasize in this video is that time signatures aren't just about how we read music, but really they're a reflection of how we experience and feel music as listeners and performers. So to get started, I want to play for you two examples. The first example is from a song by Franz Schubert called Rückblick, which means backwards glance.
Es brennt mir unter beiden Sohlen, tritt ich auch schon auf Eis und Schnee. Ich möcht nicht wieder Atem holen, bis ich nicht mehr die Türme sehe.
And our second example is from Mozart's very famous opera, Don Giovanni. Alright, so I'm going to play each of those examples again, and this time I'm going to show how the first example is in a triple meter, which means that we feel a recurring pattern of 3 beats, while the second example is in a duple meter, which means that we feel a recurring pattern of 2 beats. So what you might have noticed is that in the first example, each beat seems to divide evenly in 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. But in the second example, each beat seems to divide evenly in 3. 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. So we're going to listen to the two examples again, this time paying attention not just to the 3 beats versus 2 beats, but also to the way that each beat divides in 2 or in 3. Alright, so here we can see the voice part of each example when the singer first enters. And what you'll notice is that in our first example, we're in 3/4 time, while in our second example, we're in 6/8. Now, in your math class, you probably learned that 3/4 and 6/8 as fractions mean essentially the same thing. But in music, 3/4 and 6/8 as time signatures mean something quite different. And we can see this by looking at the first full measure of each example here. So in the Schubert, we have 6/8 notes, and because we're in 3/4 time, the way that we're going to feel these 6/8 notes is as 3 groups of 2, and that's because we have 3 beats, and each beat divides evenly in half. And then in the Mozart, because we're in 6/8, that first measure, it also has 6/8 notes, but because we're in 6/8, we're going to feel them as 2 groups of 3. Okay, so we have 2 beats, and each beat divides evenly in 3. So let's listen to the Schubert. You're going to hear the piano introduction, and then what you see on the screen there for that top staff is when the singer enters.
beiden Sohlen tritt ich auch schon auf Eis und Schnee.
All right, so now we're going to listen to the Mozart. And again, you're going to hear the introduction, so this time the orchestra. And just be aware that even though what you see is the singer's part when the singer enters, you're actually going to hear this melodic line at the very beginning of the introduction because the orchestra plays it too. So, here's where I want to explain how you know, looking at the time signature, that 3/4 is going to feel different from 6/8. In a time signature, the top number contains a lot of information. First of all, it tells you the number of beats per measure, 2, 3, or 4. Now you can have a different number of beats per measure, but the most frequently used time signatures will have 2, 3, or 4. It will also tell you whether you have a simple meter, which means each beat divides evenly by 2, or a compound meter, which means each beat divides evenly by 3. So, if the top number of your time signature is 2, 3, or 4, that means you have a simple meter with 2, 3, or 4 beats per measure. But, if the top number of your time signature is 6, 9, or 12, that means that you have a compound meter with 2, 3, or 4 beats per measure. So, 3/4 time is an example of a simple meter with 3 beats per measure, whereas 6/8 time is an example of a compound meter with 2 beats per measure. Let's listen to a few more examples. To begin, here's an excerpt from the third movement of Brahms's German Requiem. This example's in a triple meter, so there's a recurring pattern of 3 beats. Also, each beat divides evenly in 2. Our next example is from a song by Robert Schumann. As you'll hear, this excerpt is in a duple meter, which means there's a recurring pattern of 2 beats. Also, each beat divides evenly in 3.
Die Lotusblume ängstigt sich vor der Sonne pracht's und mit gesenktem erwartet sie träumend die Nacht.
Our last example comes from one of Mozart's final works, his Requiem. This excerpt is an example of a quadruple meter, so we're going to hear a recurring pattern of 4 beats. Moreover, each beat is going to divide evenly in 3. Let's listen. Looking at the vocal line for each of these 3 examples, we see they're in 3/2, 6/4, and 12/8. Again, as fractions, these may be equivalent, but as time signatures, they're not. So 3/2 time is an example of a simple meter with 3 beats per measure. That was the Brahms. 6/4 time is an example of a compound meter with 2 beats per measure. That was the Schumann. And then 12/8 is also an example of a compound meter, but with 4 beats per measure. That was the Mozart. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Jacksonville Sings.